Hello, dear friends. Thought I'd start this little one with um, this analysis, obviously, of the poetry in memory of William Butler Yeats with this little photo, just putting the present at the start, just trying to mix things up a little bit. Excuse me. So we have obviously the picture here of myself and my son. We're both smiling because we're obviously thinking about poetry, and the fact that I'm smiling shows my love for Yeats, who is the focus of Auden's poem. Now, just to make this clear, it's not a poem by Yeats, it's a poem about Yeats. And I know there's a few people in the class who had that little bit of confusion. Now, in order for us to analyse this poem as well as possible, I've actually invited Auden along to do a little bit of the reading, just as a little trick. So, are you ready, Auden? I'm quite ready. All right, excellent. Okay, we might start. Anytime, Auden.
He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. Oh, all the instruments agree, the day of his death was a dark, cold day. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable quays. By mourning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself, an afternoon of nurses and rumours. The provinces of his body revolted, the squares of his mind were empty, silence invaded the suburbs, the current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. Now he is scattered among 100 cities, and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood, and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom, a few thousand will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. Oh, all the instruments agree, the day of his death was a dark, cold day.
I might pause you for a second there, Auden, if you don't mind. Yeah, it's fine. All right. Just going to go through that first part of the poem. So the poem starts with that opening, obviously. There's that sense of sadness and loss that's created with the obvious linking between the cold of the day and the freezing of the winter of the airports and all those things that the connotations of that come with it. But we see this repetition of this term. The day of his death was a dark, cold day, which is repeated underneath as well. But what instruments we have agree the day of his death was a dark, cold day. What we're looking at within that is that, I guess, the inadequacy of how we can measure his impact. I'm saying a lot again. Damn it. But anyway, the instruments that we have, are unable to measure the actual significance, the actual impact that he's had. And when we get down to the bottom, we actually see that he's saying that he perhaps in his poetry is unable to actually convey that as well. But we'll talk about it a little bit more. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untended by the fashionable quays. In this part here, life's going on. So we can have this understanding of this significant person in the world of poetry, in the world of art, and I think it's very important that we understand that Yeats was one of Auden's idols, and the grief that comes from this is a grief of the loss of a poet, a loss of a significant figure in the poetry world, but not necessarily as a man. They only met each other a few times, and by all accounts, they didn't really like each other that much. Oh, sorry, Auden didn't like Yeats that much. I'm not sure if Yeats thought about him at all. Excuse me. But then we start going into this discussion of him as a poet as well coming through. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself. It's a really interesting line, because at this end, what we see there is it's symbolic then of that passing into something beyond what he is in that point. His poetry is surviving beyond that point. So once he dies, his work is no longer his. His ideas are no longer his. They're taken beyond. An afternoon of nurses and rumours, the provinces of his body revolted. The squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feelings failed. He became his admirers. Now that line, he became his admirers, is again that it's an odd way in an elegy. So this is like in an elegy or an ode written in the poem is written in that ode style, which I guess shows the how highly Auden held him. It's something that would happen for a great man or a great figure in history. The style in which it's written, so you'll see it in the notes that you see it talked about as like an elegy and an ode to him. And in this, but he became his admirers is an odd turn of phrase. But what he's saying there is that metaphorically, he became his work, and he became what people thought of his work. It no longer became his. It didn't. The person who wrote the poetry, the artist behind the poetry, is gone, and the ideas and the interpretations of those ideas is what lives on. And so we then have him metaphorically scattered. Now he's scattered among 100 cities, and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood, and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. So, again, it doesn't have the same tone of reverence that you would normally have in an elegy, but in the guts of the living. So those ideas are taken, and I guess the connotations that you have there, and the guts and the feelings of the people. The connotation then of guts is not really as warm as saying in the mind or the soul or whatever that you wanted to talk about. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor men and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself. So as life goes on, there will be but a few with soul. So it kind of minimalizes the impact of his poetry, for it is only a few thousand who will think of this day, and they'll think of it not as like a life-changing, terrible moment, but as a day when you did something slightly unusual. So it really downplays his impact on the world at large, which is, in a broader sense, talking about Auden's own doubts about the impact of his poetry and his art form on this world around him. Now, where this links into the kind of idea of the module, you see this lack of belief in the capacity of the individual to impact the world when there's all these bigger, darker forces at play. Remember, this is written just before the real outset of the World War II. So a real fear is permeating throughout society, and Auden in this is response is, I guess, some dejection, a lack of hope in the impact that the poet can have on the broader world. And again, what interests me, we have agreed, the day of his death was a dark, cold day. Comes back to that not really having a true measure of his true impact upon the broader world, as well as criticism perhaps himself of his capacity to articulate that. Do you agree, Auden? Yes, very good. All right, can you continue reading? Yes, I can. Okay. So we'll continue.
You were silly like us. Your gift survived it all. The parish of rich women, physical decay, yourself. Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still. For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its saying, where executives would never want to tamper. It flows south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives a way of happening, a mouth.
Thank you. I'm just going to take over for a second. Now, in the next part of this, the second part, he's talking directly to Yeats himself. So that pronoun there, you. Why is it like that? What a jerk. This one. Okay. So you were silly like us. Your gift survived us all. And then it goes through this talk about his follies, Yeats himself. So Yeats, if you have an understanding of the man, he was a very complicated person. He fell in love with a lady called Maud Gonne, who was not that good looking. Let me just tell you that. But he thought she was fantastic. She thought she was the most beautiful thing in the world. I repeat, she was not. And so the parish of rich women, and Yeats was infatuated with this woman for a very long time. Wrote a lot of poetry about her. Physical decay. Yeats dealt with his own loss of physical vitality, and this moving into old age was a real kind of focus of Yeats's later poetry. Some fantastic stuff if you actually want to just sit down and read it. Old Man of Swans, Old Man, and all, like there's just a whole bunch. Really, really cool stuff. But anyway, yourself. So Yeats had some ideas about mysticism and things like that. So we have that parish of rich women, physical decay, yourself, and Mad Ireland. So these are the factors that put you into poetry. If you're understanding Ireland at the time of Yeats's work was, and I mean, until modern time, it's still quite messed up, but politically speaking, in Easter 1916, which Yeats wrote about, and one of the poems we'll look at for Auden, he models one of his poems on it. But Easter 1916 was a poem by Auden, and in it he looks at this I guess the rising tension and destruction within Ireland. And so like he advocated against some of the what was happening, and he also sought out public office as well. But there's a criticism there that exists of, again, not just of Yeats but his poetry as a whole, because in the next line, and I'm just gonna change that one to blue. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still. So despite your actions, despite you engaging with the poetry of the time, within that poetry and engaging with that political aspect of it, Ireland continues as it is. You had no impact, and the weather still is like, again, a metaphor for the aspects of life, the broader aspects of life just continuing. For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valleys of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. So it's in the form and the features of the poetry that makes it survive. So the style of the artist, and it's important to note that Auden is really well regarded for his ability to play with form and styles. Lots of poets write in a specific kind of style, but Auden would move in between the different forms and features and manipulate them and subvert them to match what he wanted to do. So he's very well regarded as a technician of poetry. A wave happening, a mouth. So the poetry then becomes a mouth, like it's a mouthpiece. And it's just again kind of like, because if we're looking at the criticism that he has earlier of it, a mouth sounding off, not providing anything. It's not a body. It's not an agent of change. So there's a lot of pessimism that exists within that understanding of the poem. Anyway, I'll let Auden continue.
Earth receive an honoured guest, William Yeats is laid to rest. Let the Irish vessel lie, emptied of its poetry. Time that is intolerant of the brave and innocent, and indifferent in a week to a beautiful physique, worships language and forgives everyone by...
Sorry, there's just been some technical difficulties. Just give me 1 sec.
This conceit lays its honours at their feet.
So this is, obviously, I forgot to press the button, so it's over here on this part.
In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie, locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night, with your unconstraining voice, till persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. Sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise.
So obviously there's that real shift into that next stanza, into the next part of it, and there's so much in here to look at. Now I'm going to do this one a little bit different from previous ones in the sense that I'm not going to break it down as much, but I want to look at it in terms of, if you look at Auden and his the most important part in terms of linking to that idea of the politics, we have this aspect here, and I'm just trying to press it. Okay. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Again, if we're looking at this contextually, we have this terrible event that's just waiting to happen, and there's a foreshadowing that exists there within Auden's work. So he's predicting as to the future. That's what's going to happen, and we have this lines here where there's an element of, it's kind of in contrast to what he had earlier, in terms of the lack of a role of the poet. I guess in terms of follow it, poet, follow it right to the bottom of the night with your unconstraining voice. But again, is that kind of that link back to the idea of the mouth. Still persuade us to rejoice. So there's that attempt to guide us through this. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. So make something out of what has been said and what will be said. And the farming, I guess, can be like a metaphor for the actual process and features of writing, which again, it harks back
earlier stanza. And so within this poem, it's less obvious than others in terms of the three that we've looked at so far, in terms of that making that link to the module. If you were to use this poem, you're really going to be looking at how Auden, again, it fits in the as a joiner to the others, because Auden's really looking at the impact that one person, an individual, can have on the broader political world, and criticizing that to an extent. And on the flip side, looking at how if the broader society is going following in such a way of looking at human success and distress. There's rhyming couplets running throughout that like the AABB rhymes scheme that runs throughout this last part. It shows that there's again a criticism of that broader society. So you could link it to all three of the poems through that idea of the role of that individual in the context of the broader society and what impact can they have, and perhaps some form of criticism of what role they have played. And then, on the contrast to that, looking at how the broader society can impact upon that individual. I'm going to have a few more notes put on Edmodo for you in regards to the annotation of it a little bit more, looking at the techniques throughout, but the main ones you're looking at are that idea, that the metaphor of poetry and the poet as a whole, and the impact that it has beyond. If you're looking at the writings, the examples that I put up on Edmodo not long ago, and I was trying to download them, they don't seem to be working properly, so I'm going to try and put them up again. But one of them, or two of the pieces had this poem as an example, so you can see that you can use it. You're not going to be looking at the whole thing. That's the important thing within it. You're looking at how does it link then specifically to the module, and specifically to the module within this one. Again, is that kind of that role of the poet, in that broader sense of that the poet on society as a whole, and the criticism of that, which is a contrast to the earlier poems. So you can see that an interesting line of argument might be looking at Auden himself and the impact upon him and his understanding of the world as a result of his dismay with the political situation at the time. And so there's that link that you can make using this poem as a conduit between the other ones. And now with this one, there wasn't in today's recording, there hasn't been as many jokes and stuff, and I apologise. I tried to get something happening, but it didn't work. I'm going to leave you just with one last little thing. Now, does this Zoom work? Let me see. No, it's hard to see. School photos. Little fella here. A young Mr. Conway. Like you to note, arms folded, like a boss, like a rebel. It's how we do. It's how we did in the LP, Layla Park, where I'm from. Anyway, this will be up with some. I'll put the poem itself as well, some readings. What we're going to be looking at. Again, what I'll ask you to do is look at it again, but really focus on how you can make those links between them as well. I'm looking to record, and it should be up on Monday afternoon, rather than a poem itself, talking about how we make links between them as well. So thank you. Arrivederci.